Hello, DGBA. Welcome to the Speed Boost PRs. Will be presented by me, SunSun, and BM.
Yo, what's up, guys? BM here.
We're gonna rank every single team from Speed Boost, and we're gonna go over what we liked about them, what we didn't like about them, and just give some of our thoughts. And keep in mind, this is an opinionated video. All of these are our opinions. Don't get too aggressive or angry at us. Some people might have different opinions on your team, and some people might like it, some people might not. At the end of the day, this is just for.
Yeah,
And
and
with
also
that,
Brandon's recording for us in the
yes, and
back.
Brandon's the recording. And with that, let's go into our number 16 coach, which will be Chip, the coach of the Duran. His team consists of Landorus I, Tapu Lele, Heatran, Scolipede, Alakazam, Blastoise, Tangrowth, Mega Kangaskhan, Scrafty, Aurorus, Luxray, and Slowpoke.
So, right off the bat here, I think it's pretty obvious that he's going for more sort of a psychic spam with Lele Zam. I think that this team is pretty decent all around. You have Blastoise, Tangrowth, Mega Kang. Heatran has a really nice defensive core. And offensively speaking, Landers is just really centralizing. Having Heatran that are support offensively along with the psychic spams to pressure some steel types is really nice. I think some of the main issues with this team is that the fighting checks defensively aren't really that sturdy. You have Tapu Lele, Scolipede, Zam, Scolipede, Alakazam aren't really the best at switching into them, as well as Landers, which can obviously be covered by the regular ice punches that they run, as well as that the Dark Resistance Scrafty, which isn't really going to be coming every game. He does have some decent knockoff absorbers and Tangrowth and Blastoise, but just unresisted throughout most of the entire team.
I think something else to know about this team is that it lacks a true cleric. There's nobody that can really spread heal bell, aromatherapy. Nothing can really heal status, right? Except there's a Lele. Lele does get aromatherapy, but I don't think you usually want to run that on it. A lot of times, like if you burn some of these mons, if you paralyze them, they're out of commission, right? You toxic a Tangrowth and it's on the timer. A lot of these mons, like they struggle to recover HP as well. Blastoise, Heatran, Lele, even like Scrafty and Lando, like they don't have innate ways to regen HP. They're very reliant on wish passing, which comes from a Mega Kangaskhan, or leftovers, which a lot of these mons might not have the luxury to run because this team also struggles clearing hazards. Like looking at this team, the only removal options we have are Landorus I with Defog and Blastoise with Rapid Spin. Lando I usually don't want to run Defog, and then Blastoise is it can be a good spinner, but it cannot always come in and spin at the right times. So a lot of these bonds like Heatran or Lele, they might get chipped. Scolipede, you might have to run boots every week when you miss out on the Life Orb power boost. Tangrowth, if you're running, Assault Vest, Rocky Helmet, you have to take chip every time you come in, right? So a lot of small issues, but they add up.
Yeah, I think his pivoting options are pretty decent in like the toys Tangrowth Mega Kang, but he doesn't have any really good true momentum. He only has U-turn Landers and flip turn Blastoise as well. And especially when you have something like Tapu Lele or Alakazam under Psychic Terrain, you really want to be able to bring in those Pokemon as freely as possible.
Yeah, so it's a good way to attempt a psychic terrain offense, but there are small issues that could be patched up. The Scrafty, for example, it could potentially be upgraded if we maybe scrap up the Aurorus, Luxray, Slowpoke for like a better dark type. Right? I doubt something like Luxray or Aurorus will come to that many games really.
Yeah, that and while flying types aren't really that prevalent, the only really good flying resist here is Heatran, and when you have Scolipede, Tangrowth, two of your more prominent Pokemon both weak to them, and the rest don't resist that, then it can be very annoying against a Tauren matchup, for example.
And let's move on to our number 15 team now, which we have Deja and the Suburban Slowpokes. His team consists of Dragapult, Megalopony, Scizor, Galarian Weezing, Deoxys Defense, Superior, Gligar, Raikou, Drapion, Manaphy, and Heatmor.
Yeah, so I think the first three picks here are really nice. Dragapult, Megalop, Scizor, a really nice Volturn core. You have Lop that can check the dark types of Dragapults, which forces in Scizor that checks the fairies. Both Pult and Lop can force in, and then obviously you have Scizor and Dragapult that can check the psychics that Lop will switch in. I think this team really falls apart in the second half of the draft. I think Serp sort of makes sense for those bulky waters, but outside of that, isn't really offering much utility. I think Gligar as a secondary rocker isn't too reliable. Deoxys Defense is a really consistent hazard setter, but I think it would really appreciate having another consistent setter alongside it. Raikou being the only flying resist as well is kind of bad, especially when your one of your main offensive threats being Megalopony is offensively checked by those flying types, and then you have the Scizor that can't really beat some as well. I think one more issue is that the lack of fire checks. I think Manaphy is really nice on this team, sort of rounds it out, but once that thing gets chipped, fire types can also sort of just break past this team.
Looking at it, a lot of these mons would be so much better if you had their Gen 7 move pool. You know, your
Yeah.
Lopunny, your Raikou, your Manaphy, Superior. Yeah, these mons, they feel really out of place. Some of them, like Raikou, Manaphy, it just feels like they're there to kind of fit a specific role. You know, your fast electric, your bulky water, but they don't feel like they have a specific. They don't really synergize much with other mons, which means that a lot of times you're bringing them and they're just they kind of just sit there and they don't offer much for you. And then you have mons like DOD, you have mons like Galarian Weezing who potentially can sack a bit of momentum for your team. A lot of these mons do have, they're pretty prone to being taunted. So their strength become their weakness because they can't perform their utility. A lot of these mons also have strong pivoting, but you don't really have anywhere to land. Who's receiving the pivot from the Dragapult, from the Megalopony? They're U-turning into which mons? Let's say your opponent brings out, their fairy type. At best you have a Scizor, but Scizor can't even check every fairy type because they have fire coverage, right? Other mons like uh, normal types, like Dragapult can go to Megalopony, but like the bulky waters, you're relying on Raikou on Superior. These are very linear mons that can be checked very easily and requires not as much prep as other mons.
Yeah, I think the Volturn core would have been really, really nice if he had a truly strong dedicated breaker. A Pult can break depending on the set that it has, but half the time, really, depending on the matchup, you're more inclined to just click U-turn and go out to your to the thing that'll check their opposing Dragapult checks. So it can vortex well, but the issue is that it can't really um do anything as a result from gaining that momentum. I feel like the only other way it could is that if it gets up spikes with Deoxys Defense, but then if you run spikes on DOD, then you're almost sort of forced to run one attacking move, which can work in some matchups. But then you're forced to run spikes, rocks, recover, and then toss when you're missing out on potential teleport or even taunt, which can be a bit of an issue. So it really starts to like pile on each other.
Yeah, and with that, we can move on to the number 14 team. We have Theodore Money and the Clueless Clefables.
Yep. So this is a stall team, which is a bit harder to rank. But generally speaking, I think this team is fairly effective. The reason why it's so low is because it's mainly just built around one archetype. There is versatility within these Pokemon. Like for example, You have really nice offensive win cons and like Calm Mind Clef, DD Dragonite, potentially like a SD Flame Charge Silvally. And you do have some breakers in there. Being like potential Life Orb Clef, Dragonite as well, Silvally again, Arcanine, even a Slowbro Galar, nasty plot. Oh yeah, and the team itself is Clefable, Dragonite, Toxapex, Dugtrio, Silvally, Mega Sableye, Arcanine, Skarmory, Galarian, Slowbro, Avalugg, Duosion, and Dunsparce. I think his main check being Dugtrio, of course, which is most stalls check to more offensive Pokemon. I think that's fine. I think having Dragonite here is also really nice because it adds another Cleric first team. I think which is really appreciated when you have when you want to force Clef to run Wish, because up against things like Silvally, for example, which might not have reliable recovery, having Heal Bell Dragonite for either to take out that move slot from Clef, or also for it to heal Bell like a potential Silvally type that's Rest is really nice.
Yeah, to add to that, this is a very Theo-esque team, right? But there are weaknesses to his playstyle. A lot of strong wall breakers, potential unexpected setup mons can give him a lot of trouble, right? And looking at this team as well, the ground type is the singular duck trio, and so this team could be very, prone to electric spam, physical like setup electric types like Zeraora, or even like calm mindsets like Tapu Koko. This team could struggle heavily just because it doesn't have too many ways to, receive those attacks, and they're faster than Duck Trio too. So they might struggle switching in or like trapping them fully. Yeah, Savali ground can come, but then you're limiting your Savali type, and then you can also be susceptible to Bolt Beam spam. In that case, Ice Beam Thunderbolt, it hits everything, and it hits them decently hard too, because there's not that strong ground type to really stop the Bolt Beam spam, or even like the Volt Switch spam that you can abuse with this team.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
but
Slowbro Gallo is a really underrated pick, actually. I think this thing might put in work. There's only 2 regen mons on here as well. But I think both of those are really consistent ones.
yeah, a lot of these mons can be good defensive walls. It's just how Theo will use them, right? It's how the opponent will play against it. Again, playing against stall, it's not always just beating the team. You have to beat the player behind it. And so hopefully Theo can put this team to good use, which he always does.
Yeah, I think the variation on this stall will be interesting to see how used, and I think it'll be a bit more fun for him to prep.
All right, with that, let's move on to the next one. Number 13 with Spoink and Moines Delibirds.
Yeah, that's it.
He'll say it. But we have Mega Scizor, Necrozma, Swampert, Mienshao, Thunderous T, Talonflame, Lycanroc Dusk, Dredagon, Vileplume, and Azumarill.
Yeah, off the bat, I like the momentum options here. Scizor, Swampert, Mienshao, Talonflame. I think those are really nice. I also like the rock options here. I think one of my main issues with this team is that it just looks a little bit underwhelming. From an offensive standpoint, Mienshao, for example, one of its best sets, and not its best set, is Scarfed. Necrozma can break, but I think on this team where the defensive options are a bit limited, it might be forced to run defensive a lot of the times. You have Thunderous, which can break, but it isn't the best. It can struggle with opposing electric types, which Swampert is there to check, but doesn't really synergize that well because the rest of the offensive core is sort of weak to electrics as well. Lycanroc Dust, I think, is a really nice physical breaker on this team. It just looks a bit underwhelming from my end, and also the lack of ghost resist or immunity is really also sucks, especially when Gengar and Spectre are 2 of the most prominent ghost types, and they really go to town on this team.
Yeah, not having a dark type or a normal type is absolutely, you know, it could just completely destroy your draft because any ghost type can just slap on Shadow Ball and just go with ham against this team. Not many. Sometimes you can alleviate that issue having Spadef walls, but not many of these mons are suitable to that role. Not many of them can really go the Spadef route and take multiple Shadow Balls. They just get worn down way too quickly. And then one more thing to note is that these guys all are susceptible to status again. You have your toxic, your Will-O-Wisp. Will-O-Wisp is super good against the team because even the mons that aren't physical get worn down quickly. And then the only cleric or the heal bell user slash aromatherapy is just Vileplume. So if you want to cure the status, then you have to bring that every week. One more thing to know is that this team is somewhat weak knockoff as well. Yeah, there's a Mega
Yeah,
Scizor, but Thunderous T, Talonflame, they don't want their boots knocked off. Mienshao wants to keep the scarf. A lot of these mons, like they can't really afford to lose their items, and even Mega Scizor, if you switch in on a knock, sometimes you take 12% from rocks, you take the maybe 20% from knockoff, and then you have to roost. Or else next time you come in, you're gonna get 2 AKO. Maybe they double switch and you're stuck in the bad spot with Mega Scizor.
yeah. I think this team would have really appreciated one more, um, more premium defensive Pokemon because I feel that the top three Pokemon is the Cosmos Swampert are going to be pressured quite a lot into defensive roles, and that might be an issue because this core doesn't really check everything. There are types and certain Pokemon that can become susceptible to them.
Yeah, I think another issue to know is that this team has a pretty big speed gap between 79 and 101. When all the
Yeah,
base 100s can run, adamant modest, it becomes a lot harder to switch in their moves. And mons like Urshifu, Victini, even like Kyurem, like they can just run boosting natures, and it's you already don't have good Wicked Blow switch-ins because your fairy types in Azumarill, and now that Wicked Blow is gonna hurt that much harder. The Kyurem
yeah,
that's gonna destroy this team because your sole check is basically Mega Scizor. It's a good check, but modest nature, Stealth Rock, that can wear down your Scizor very, very quickly.
yeah. I think it mainly just that defensive core and the speed gaps sort of enabling those non-speed boosting natures kind of really do it for this team. I think offensively it can work. I think there's a little bit less synergy than might have been wanted, but these Pokemon by themselves are pretty good. But collectively, they just aren't too optimal.
And now let's move on to number 12. We have II with Trick of Eye. His team consists of, that's round one, Galarian Slowking, then Weavile, Mega Charizard X, Corviknight, Hatterene, Mamoswine, Roserade, Keldeo, Komala, Vikavolt, and Crustle.
Yeah, so my main criticisms of this team off the bat is that the hazards and the hazard control is kind of underwhelming. In terms of hazard control, all you really have is default Corviknight. You have Hatterene with Magic Bounce, but that is a Pokemon that isn't necessarily coming every week, as opposed to Corviknight. And especially when you have like a Zard X on this team, I feel like you probably want at least one more decent remover. The hazard options as well are pretty mediocre. You have Rocks on Mamoswine. You have Spikes and T-Spikes on Rose, which isn't that consistent of a mon. And then you have the Crustle, which is hardly going to come to every matchup as well. The momentum options could also be a bit better as well, like Flip Turn Keld, and U-Turn Corviknight, Volt Switch Vikavolt could be a bit better, but this team doesn't necessarily need momentum as much, it would just appreciate it. And I think that Rela's Corviknight slot is going to be pressured a lot. It's one of the only Pokemon that can grant him true momentum. It's one of his main defensive Pokemon as well, along with the Slowking Galar. and it's basically his only viable remover as well. So it's going to be pressure to do a lot here on this team, and it's one of his only decent defensive ground checks as well. He has a lot of offense that can check grounds and Rose, Keld, Weavile, but defensively speaking, something like, say for example, Zygarde might be really tough for this team to deal with.
For sure, yeah. Corviknight can't really take 1,000 arrows too well. And then
Yeah, or
something else to note, this team can struggle with offensive water types a lot. The bulky water here, well, bulky in a sense, it's Keldeo, right? Your other water check is Roserade. So something like I don't know, Crawdon or maybe they have the Keldeo, so that's not always an option. But even like Primarina, right? That can give this team a lot of trouble because you're kind of forced to run very defensive mons with defensive sets just to handle them, well. And if those mons ever get worn down or just you get hazards up, they're put into a KO range and they kind of lose their purpose. Yeah, G King can handle the special waters, but the physical ones, a lot of times they can get broken down pretty quickly, especially when your Corviknight is trying to do everything. It's trying to patch up your ground weakness. It's trying to be the momentum user between Mons. Because looking at Weavile, G-King, and the Zardex, even Mammal, they're very stationary. They can't really go into each other well. But now you're very reliant on your pivoting Mon in the Corviknight to bring them into the field. So a lot of times you could get stuck just in your Corviknight. It's forced to take rocks chip, it's forced to take small hit, and it builds up and you can eventually get overwhelmed.
yeah, that and the knockoff absorbers as well are also kind of suspect. I mean, you have Colberg, Glowking, which can work, but then your next best options are like Keldeo, which doesn't really like getting knocked off. If you switch in the Corv and lose your boots, your Rocky Helmet, or your lefties, then that just puts a lot more pressure on it. You can maybe switch in the Zardex, but if they have rocks up and you haven't defogged this yet, then you're taking 25% every time. I think if the Corv was supported a bit better defensively, then this team would have looked a lot better. I think maybe switching out Hatterene for another fairy, a bulkier fairy, would have been really nice. I do get like the trick room options with like Hatterene, Slowking, Thickavolt. That can be decent, but I'm not too sure if it's worth the slots here on this team.
Right. Gone to number 11. We have Zazo and the BB Sea Kings. On his team, we have Lando T, Latios, Tyranitar, Excadrill, Buzzwole, Mega Slowbro, Blacephalon, Grimmsnarl, Eldegoss, Shelmet, Jinx, and Reedon.
I think the top half of this team, particularly like the first 7, this is a really cool team to use. Some of my main criticisms about it is that it's the main core of Landorus, Tyranitar, Excadrill kind of bring in a lot of common weaknesses, being waters, grasses, ices, defensively speaking at least. You have Slowbro Gallard there that is able to check at least 2 out of those 3 types. Not Slowbro Gallard, Mega Slowbro, which is able to check 2 of those 3 types, but I feel like there's a lot more pressure on it, especially since it's Mega as well. It can't run boots. It can still teleport freely as well. The bottom end of this team, Shelmet, Jinx, Greedent, I don't really see coming too much. And I think the defensive core, particularly like Mega Slowbro, Buzzwole, Tyranitar. Tyranitar has a 4 times weakness to fighting types. So if there's any like decent special Pokemon that has access to fighting coverage and like Focus Blast, up against the Buzzwole and Mega Slowbro, if they're decent enough, they can just break through that whole defensive core. I think offensively speaking, the team synergizes well enough. Ground types can be a bit annoying to take down, but with the raw power that Landorus, Latios, and like something like a Bandit Excadrill can grant, that's really nice.
Right. Zazo built this team, centered around his first few months, right? You can tell just based on even like the price ranges. Lando T Latios T Tar Excadrill, very strong, very powerful core. But a lot of these mons, as you mentioned, they share a common weakness. This team lacks a decent Scald resist. Yeah, there's Latios, there's Mega Slowbro, but the issues with those two is that they don't want to take Scald burns, and especially Rock's chip. Your Latios, your Mega Bro, they're usually not going to run boots. So if you switch them in to handle Scalds, you might get worn down very quickly. He does have a lot of random mons at the end. I'm sure there's a reason for all of them. Zazo builds his drafts with reason. Shaman is probably for the one Urshifu he's going to have to fight. Jinx is for the one offensive water type that he's has on his, somebody else drafted. Greedon is the only thing that can potentially stop Spectrier or another ghost type, well, because T-Tart and Grimmsnarl, they get Willow Whips. They're kind of useless after that. These are understandable, but only he can understand why he drafted those mons. And this team is also very slow, right? Your speed caps at the Latios at 110. This is not as ideal. Like, yes, you have good Scarfers. You have a Sand Drill that can, rise way up high. But for other people prepping, when you have to face 110 as your fastest, a lot of mons like your Mega B Drills or your Mega Lopunny, even like your, sometimes Weavile can even they don't even have to run, they don't have to run Jolly because they can aggro creep the Latios. So they could be potential for strong mons just running boosting natures.
Yeah. Uh, I, this momentum options are also Landorus and Mega Slowbro. Those are really good, but those are the only ones out there, and you really want to be able to bring things like Latios and Excadrill in for free. And if you're facing a certain team that's able to pressure those Pokemon with like the mid ground, then that can be really unfortunate because you don't want your Latios to get like knocked off or status or take a fair amount of chip unless it's like a bulkier set. I think that, as well as the fact that the fairy resists are actually pretty bad on this team. You have Excadrill, which can check them really nice. But then outside of that, Blacephalon is the other fairy resist, which isn't really going to be switching in too much. You have Latios, T-Tar, Buzzwole, all weak to fairy. Landorus isn't going to be able to check most of the fairies, particularly on the special side as well. Something like a Gardevoir, for example, as simple as basic as that, can really sort of go to town on this team if that Excadrill is a more defensive set. And you might be forced to bring like Spadef, a Chople T-Tar, or even like Spadef Mega Slowbro.
All right, and with that, we can move on to number 10. We have Halu and the King City Cresselia, who has Urshifu Single Strike, Tapu Fini, Spectrier, Rotom Heat, Registeel, Latias, Mega Beedrill, Powdon, Tangela, and Magneton.
I really like the first 3 to 4 picks here. Even the Registeel, my main issues with this team are the fact that to an extent the Registeel and the Powdon as well, they really sap out a lot of momentum that this team grants. Urshifu Rotom Heat as like a Volt turn core along with the Mega B is really nice. And the momentum that Fini and Spectre can capitalize on is really nice as well, but having your main defensive Pokemon in Registeel and Hippowdon sap that momentum away, I feel, is kind of just a hindrance. The Rockers as well, while they are consistent, there aren't really two. It's mainly just Registeel and Hippowdon. There aren't any offensive Rockers. Defog options are pretty good. You have Lottie, Rotom, Heat, Fini. I think Urshifu Fini as a core is pretty solid, along with Spectre as well. I think I would have preferred another poison or a better steel type in order to punish the fairies that Urshifu is luring out. Beedrill is a really nice fairy check, but I think the main issue is that you have to ensure that rocks aren't up on your side or every time it's taking 25%. And if like an opposing steel type that's also running Rocky Helmet comes in on the Beedrill, it's taking another 18%, and then it's probably gonna have to take another 25% if it switches back in and the rocks aren't removed as yet.
All right, I think this team, it's got good offense, it's got good defense. It's got good mix of everything, but there are like small weaknesses here and there. A lot of these mons, Tapu Fini, Registeel, Rotom Heat, they don't have that much innate survivability. They can switch in, but they don't have good ways to heal off the damage. So it's really rely on leftovers or even like Latias Healing Wish to just keep them healthy. A lot of these mons like they don't want to come in too often because Holly wants to play a fast game with Mega Beedrill pivoting in and out with her Shifu Spectrier. A lot of times, play fast, play aggro. Though he has, defensive options in Hippowdon, Tangela. They can eat every physical hit you can throw at them. And, paired out with Tapu Fini, they can't even get toxic or worn down.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Tangela here on the bottom end is actually pretty nice, getting another ground resist. Because your main ground checks are Rotom, Heat, and Latios, which are pretty decent. But having Registeel and like Beedrill not being able to tank hits too well, and the Hippowdon as well, which might sap momentum, I think that's really nice. I think this team is pretty solid. It's pretty clearly like a balanced team. I think if he had defensive mons that could have acted as better pivots, and that would have been a lot better for him. But I think his offense, and particularly like the first 3 to 4 picks along with that Mega B, will carry him throughout the entire season.
Yep. Now, next up, we have Chess and the Louisiana Lawnmowers. He has Celesteela, Hydreigon, Nidoqueen, Kartana, Fairy, Reuniclus, Gastrodon, Blaziken, Teleon, Magnemite, and Mega Aerodactyl.
I think this team really supports Celesteela quite nice. I think Hydreigon as a Celesteela check, Celesteela partner rather, is pretty decent, being able to grab momentum, also being able to sort of be versatile in the sense that it can run both defensive and offensive sets. Having a really good ground type in Nidoqueen that's also a good rocker is really nice to check those electric types that Celesteela might struggle against. The fire checks are slightly suspect, at least defensively. Gastrodon is there and is very fat and can check the majority of fire types. But I think something a bit more consistent would have been nice. There is also Mega Aerodactyl here, which can check them offensively, which is also pretty solid for that. So having both offensive and defensive checks to Celesteela's main weaknesses really complements it. I think the removal options could be a bit better. You have Mega Arrow, Cart, Blaziken, which don't really like running Defog, and also Hydreigon, which can, but again, really doesn't like running removal. I think the momentum options are pretty decent. You have U-turn on Hydreigon, Blaziken, and Inteleon. But Inteleon usually isn't going to run that, depending on the set. I think the hazard options are really nice. Nidoqueen for rocks and Toxic Spikes is really solid. Rock's Arrow I don't think is the best, but it is an option, and Clefairy is also there. I think one of the main issues with this team is that if a Pokemon has decent enough stab and has really good coverage against his team, it can be a bit annoying because you have the ground types that check the electric types. Basically, if a Pokemon has strong coverage against this team, something like a Nidoking, for example, can really go to town on this team, and I think that might be one of the main issues. That and the fact that offensively speaking, like the main core of like Celesteela, Nidoqueen, Cart, that team is kind of weak to ice types, kind of also weak to fires as well. He does have things on the back end that do check those Pokemon, but having the double UB can be a bit of a double-edged sword at times.
Yeah, you mentioned the ice weakness, but I just want to, elaborate more on that. Both of his primary steals don't resist ice. Between Hydreigon, Nidoqueen, and Mega Aerodactyl, they're all weak to ice as well. So then you have most of your top mons not being able to take too many ice hits. So then your opponent can freely run, their ice beams, their ice punches, and they can just throw it out with impunity because who's coming in to take that hit, right? It's probably not Inteleon. It's probably not Blaziken. They don't really want to come in on too much, you know, Weaviles, Mammoth Swines, Curums. they kind of just eat these team or this team alive because there's no good switch into any of those mons. This team is very offensive. You got good ways to hit mons from both spectrums. You got Cell Steel, amazing cleaning option if you just autotomize American Aerodactyl faster than everything else. They could even DD up, home claws up, outspeed everything and just sweep from there. But it's getting to that point that might be troubling for this team. There's good momentum. Yeah, there's also there's good momentum, but you can't exactly. It's kind of difficult to get some of these months in because they have to come in and take a hit, right? Or they have to come in after, they're U-turning after taking a hit, so they get worn down, they get chipped, and it's kind of hard for the team to really recover if they're too far behind.
Yeah, that and the fact that actually the raw recovery here, particularly like Celcil and Nidoqueen, though those two being arguably some of your better defensive Pokemon, them not having reliable recovery can suck. There is the Clefairy, Reuniclus, Gastro on the back end, which can all recover up. But I think maybe a Wish Passer here would have been really nice. I know Clef can technically Wish Pass, but I don't think it's the best fit here for that role.
Right. And with that, let's move on to our top half. We have Ethan coming at number 8 with the Nashville Predators. And his team is Mew, Gengar, Infernape, Klefki, Porygon 2, Mega Garchomp, Lantern, Weezing, Shaman, Slurpuff, and Sneasel.
So a couple of my main issues with this team is that the first 4 to 5, the first 4 picks actually, there's sort of kind of a ground weakness here in Gengar, Infernape, Klefki. I know on the back end there's Levitate, Weezing as well as Shaman, but having some of your better main Pokemon weak to ground can be quite bad, especially when yours just aren't too consistent. That and the fact that I think the rock options could have been a bit better. I think rocks Mew and rocks Infernape aren't too ideal. You can't afford to run rocks on Mega Garchomp and run like dual stabs, sword stance, or just like 3 attacks rocks. But I think having a more defensive option just in case you want to run a more offensive 4 attacks Garchomp or 3 attacks sword stance would have been really nice so that you're not forced to run rocks on like Infernape or Mew. You do have spike options in Klefki and Defog and Mew, which I think are really solid removers. The momentum could have been a bit better. You really only have Infernape as a solid in momentum gainer along with the P2, which it's all right, but I think having one more thing that can pivot in there and bring things in safely would have been really nice. Mew can do that, but I think on this team, actually, he probably doesn't want to run defensive Mew as much. I feel like the way it's structured is that most likely in a lot of his weeks, he's probably going to bench one of the Gengar and Infernape or Mega Garchomp and run Klefki P2 Mew, or Klefki P2 as mainly his defensive core, while trying to alleviate Mew's defensive duties in order to make sure that it can like properly break or sweep.
Right. One more look at this team. It's actually kind of slow. Right. A lot of these mons, they don't hit as high. 115, that's a Sneasel. This can be, it can be avoided because a lot of these mons are good Scarfers. Gengar and Infernape, setup mons like Mew, Mega Garchomp, they can be pretty fast if need be. However, it's getting to the setting up part that's the issue, right? Because a lot of these mons, they have very common weaknesses. Gengar and Infernape, even Lantern, like ground spam super free. So it's just how do you avoid losing to opposing Garchomps? Like Lando Eye kind of demolishes this team after you knock off the P2, right? Offensive mons just you don't have good ways to track them reliably, especially when your bulky water is a singular lantern. So you have to rely on getting your spikes up, your walks up, even your webs, T spikes. Right, you force your opponent to just switch into your multitude of threats, Infernape you turning in and out, right? But that's like the main appeal of this team because you have to go from Infernape into other mons to force your opponent into their defensive mons to their appropriate threats. But then once you have, I feel like once this team opens up, the opportunity to once you take down like a mon, this team has like a good domino effect in that you can just snowball really quickly. Because once one mon falls, it's really easy for Mew to come in and just clean up. It's really easy for Garchomp to just click skill shot and then kill everything. Even Gengar can set up and just clean up some teams if you get rid of the appropriate threats. So, let's get into that one KO. That's the important part for this team.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times because of that, the lack of really fast Pokemon, and really the fact that a lot of the Pokemon on this team aren't too bulky, he's probably going to be forced to bring Scarf Gengar, Scarf Infernape a lot to check other offensive Pokemon if Klefki or P2 aren't able to handle them.
Yep. And now let's move on to number 7. We have Dibro and the Buffalo Sox. And his team consists of Tapu Koko, Victini, Gliscor, Ferrothorn, Terrakion, Tentacruel, Mecha Gyarados, Blissey, Cofagrigus, and Cricket.
I really like the first 5 picks here. I think Coco Victini is a really solid core. It is a bit ground weak off the bat. The Gliscor is there, which is really nice, but then you have your Terrakion, which is also weak to ground types. You have Ferrothorn, which is a steel type that doesn't actually resist, not a steel type rather, but a grass type that doesn't actually resist ground. So your main ground check being the Gliscor, while it is really consistent, with it being primarily the only check can be a bit of an issue, especially if there's like certain ground types that can power through that. I think the fighting type answers as well, defensively speaking, can be a bit suspect. Kofag really is sort of forced to come against something like the Mega Glade or the Mega Medicham, and while it does check those Pokemon effectively, I think having one or two more better utilities against those in general would have been really nice. Coco doesn't really want to switch in on fightings. Victini gets knocked off. Gliscor gets covered by the ice punches. Tentacruel isn't really a solid fighting check, at least the physical ones. Gyarados can sort of soft check them if it comes in and intimidates them, but if rocks are up, then that can be a bit of an issue. I feel like Gliscor in particular is going to be pressured to do a lot here to check the grounds consistently, to potentially grab momentum, to potentially defog as well, because it's one of his only primary movers. I personally don't rate Tentacruel that much, and ideally you don't want to run defog on your Coco. What I will say is that I do like that Terrakion is on this team because it's a really nice knockoff absorber for the Victini and for the Coco. Being able to get that justified boost and then dishing out a really strong hit is really nice here as well. I think the setup options are really good as well. You have more offensive ones being like Terrakion, Gyarados that can Terrakion can dual dance up, Gyarados can DD up. You have more defensive options as well, like SD Gliscor, and if you want to, you can also run Stored Power, Coco if you need to. I think this team is pretty solid. I feel a bit iffy about the Tentacruel being on this team, as well as like the main defensive fighting checks having like your Ferrothorn and Blissey, two of your main defensive Pokemon being weak to them, and then your Gliscor that can get covered by the ice punches is really suspect, even though your offense can handle the fighting types really well.
Yeah, something else to bring up, let's say there's like a Latios, a strong psychic type, maybe Tapu Lele, right? Who is switching in to that Tapu Lele or that Latios? Because the Gyarados has got to Mega Evolve before it can even take a hit. And even then, it's still getting chipped and worn down really, really quickly. So having Mega Gyarados as your sole Dark type can leave you very vulnerable to just Psychic types carrying Psyshock, right? Because that Blissey is going to drop to 2 Psyshocks. The Ferrothorns can probably get Focus Blasted or Mystical Fired. So, very, very strong Psychic types can give this team a lot of issues. And then looking at this team again, It's very awkward in terms of removal, right? Because Coco doesn't want to run it, Gliscor doesn't want to run it. You don't want to bring Tentacruel because it's your ground type or your water type being weak to ground, and being Gliscor being the only source of ground, checking ground types is like not ideal, of course. It also has it lacks that strong special threat. Yeah, Coco can do it. Victini can run special, but there's no one mon that can just really punch a hole through the walls. Because a lot of times Victini, if you want to run you know offensive sets, you're gonna take rocks damage. You're gonna get chipped down. If you're running boots, then you're not a boosting item. So your blue flares are obviously not gonna hit as hard as your potential V creates. That's just a given.
Yeah, I think compared to the earlier Voltron team with the Megalop Dragapult, there isn't like a really strong special breaker. Victini does hit hard, but that's mainly due to its high base power moves as opposed to any natural natural special attack. So as you said, it is kind of forced to run like boosting items, and if it's running boosting items, gets rock chip. However, I do like the Terrakion here because at the very least, Coco and Victini, they probably are able to, especially the Victini, probably able to lure in um, some like the bulkier fires, the dragons, that the Coco may be able to break, but more particularly that the like a choice banded Terrakion will probably be able to Oko or do a lot of damage too. I think because there's a dedicated breaker here in the Terrakion, it really serves like the first two Volt turn pair really well because there is actually something there that could really break down a team.
Yeah, and with that, we can move on to our number 6. We have Ian and the Pittsburgh Steelers. This team consists of Zeraora, Rillaboom, Zygarde 50%, Jirachi, Mega Blastoise, Salazzle, Umbreon, Miltank, Tornadus, Dusclops, and El Creamy.
So a couple things off the bat. Um, I'm personally not too big of a fan of Zeraora or Rillaboom in this gen, but I think the first five Pokemon as a core in as like a main backbone for the team works really solid together. I think some of the main issues being the main rocker here is Jirachi into Miltank. They're both, especially Miltank, they're both consistent rockers, but I think I would have preferred having like one more. Especially not having Jirachi as like the primary rocker compared to like the Miltank. The momentum options are pretty decent. You have Flip Turn Toys, U-Turn on Jirachi, and Rillaboom. I think the main issue here is that I'm not too sure about like really fat grass types. I know there's a Tornadus in the back and like a Salazzle, but something like a Mega Venusaur, for example, depending on its set, can actually really uh go through this team. Granted, it isn't drafted by any of the teams in the division, but really fat grasses can sort of just sit in front of this team and start to status them and start to chip them down as well because the Blastoise is forced to run coverage. Zeraora can't really beat too many grass types unless it's running like bulk up Blaze Kick. Rillaboom, depending on the grass type, isn't probably going to beat it. Zygarde isn't usually beating grass types as well, and Jirachi, especially if it's running defensive sets, probably isn't going to be able to muscle past them.
Yeah, and I think this team, the bottom half with Umbreon, Miltank, Dusclops, Alcremie, they can be very, very passive. They're very stationary and they're very weak, right? A lot of times they just sit on the field, tank a few hits, and then just switch out, right? But then if you can take advantage of that, if you can just abuse it or even taunt them, they are shut down very easily and very quickly. So, your defensive wall becomes like an advantage for your opponent. So you have to kind of deal with that in a way. But on the other half, the offensive parts, your Zeraora, Rillaboom, Zygarde, Mega Blastoise, like they hit hard and they can hit a lot of different sides, right? Offensive or physical, special, right? They can even run random coverage moves. For example, the Zeraora can it can potentially deal with the ground types or even the grass types. You just need to wear them down slowly, and it's up to you volt switching or U-turning into your other threats in Mega Blastoise or Salazzle to really put a dent into your opponent's team, which allows this team to potentially shine. And another thing to kind of point out is that this team's removal is not as great, right? You have Tornado's Eye and you have Mega Blastoise. Mega Blastoise can't really switch into hazards without taking it itself. So your T spikes, your Stealth Rock, your spikes, Mega Blastoise has to tank them and then you get rid of them. So then a lot of times it's worn down way too quickly. So you have to deal with that. And your rockers are Miltank and Jirachi. Yeah, they're all right rockers, but sometimes you don't really want to fit the Jirachi onto you know you don't want to fit rocks on Jirachi because you want to run other moves. Jirachi has so many other options that it can potentially run. And then so with that, this team it's got a very straightforward playstyle. You know exactly which mons are gonna come every week. Well, you think that, right?
Yeah, you
But
think.
he might show you something else. But you probably expect the first 4 out of 5 to show up every time. So
Yeah.
we'll see how he does because that's not always up to expectation.
Yeah. I will also say fighting types may also be a bit of an issue. I think offensively having the Torn being the only main check. Jirachi can also check them offensively. But I think on this team it's probably gonna be pressured to run more defensive sets. The Alchemy can check certain fighting types, as you've seen at the week 1 replay, but I think more stronger ones might give the team like an issue. Like the main ones I'm thinking of are like the psychic fightings, like the Mega Medi, the Mega Gallade, can really sort of give this team quite a bit of an issue. I think the cleric options are all right. Like Umbreon does give up a bit of momentum, but it is helped by the fact that it does get Baton Pass. And again, ideally, you don't run defensive Jirachi, but I feel like it might be pressured to like run a lot of Wish U-turn sets into like Mega Blastoise or Zygarde, which it does effectively, but ideally you want to have more versatility afforded by the team.
Yep. And with that, we can move on to number 5. We have Hunter and the Texan Trapper, who has Mega DNC, Slowking, Crocodile, Melmetal, Salamence, Rotomo, Licky Licky, Ditto, Azelf, Venomoth, and Hitmon.
I think the Mega Diancie here is supported really well. Having the Slowking there to switch into the water types is really nice. Melmetal, I think, is actually quite a decent partner for Mega Diancie. It doesn't get rocks, which is a bit annoying, but being able to check basically most of the opposing steals, a fair amount of grasses as well, depending on the grass that they are. Crocodile, I think, is really solid as well. I think the second half of this team is sort of a bit awkward. I can get why like Men's and Rotomo were drafted, and even Licky Licky, but like the Venomoth just seems a bit out of place. Same with the Azelf. This team isn't like the fastest as well. There's some decent Scarf options. Well, mainly just the Crocodile, for example. You do have some sort of speed control with like normal gem fake out Hitmonlee, but like I think that's sort of stretching. And same with like Scarf is Alpha, that's also sort of stretching. I think the rockers are really nice here, but my main issue with that would be the fact that Crocodile might be forced to run like a more defensive rocking set. That's about it. I feel like the Venomoth's kind of just tacked on there as like a secondary fairy check. I think getting like a more defensive poison would have probably been a bit better. But overall, I think this team is pretty solid. I do like the momentum options, mainly like the Slowking and also Volt Switch Rotomo. I think U-turn on the Moth and U-turn on the Self are a bit less suboptimal depending on the set they're running. I think this team is solid enough.
Right. I think one thing to note is that a lot of these defensive mons they're actually quite weak to fighting. Your crocodile, your Melmetal, or your licky licky, they can't really switch into that close combat. Slowking can, but Slowking's not known for its good defenses. It's known for its SPDF. So, if you set up your SD, your bulk up, you can knock it off. You can have Thunder Punch, Ice Punch for the Salamence. These mons, like, they can't really handle a Mega Gallade or, or Shifu because they just don't have the options to switch in well, right? Fighting and Wicked Blow kind of just blows back this whole team. You're very reliant on that one singular Ditto to pull you through and just kill it instead. And so, this Ditto is kind of your saving grace, but also kind of the thing that's holding your team back a little bit. Because without Ditto, you lose to a lot of the setup mons, the faster mons, because this team isn't that fast. But the Ditto is also, like, you could replace it with a defensive mon or upgrade another mon to benefit your team more, to have it be more stable. So it's like a double-edged sword in this case. And this team can also struggle to kill bulky waters. You have one Rotom that can do it, but even then, like, sometimes you got to predict the Ice Beam because sometimes the skulls or toxics it's coming your way, and Rotom might not always want to switch in because Slowking's not gonna kill that Milotic. Slowking's not gonna kill that Slowbro, and so they get in their mons for free and they can just make momentum out of it. So it's one thing to really watch out for.
Yeah, I probably would have swapped out the Venomoth and maybe even the Azelf for like a more defensive poison type and maybe another check to waters here. I think the first four is really going to be able to carry this entire team. I feel like the fifth and sixth slots, well, particularly I think that sixth slot Rotom might be forced to come a lot of times. Might be rotated basically every week depending on what needs to be brought. But I think like Mega Diancie Melmetal into Slowking is just a really nice core to build around. It sort of just autopilots itself at times.
Yep, and with that, let's go on to number 4. We have Rye and the Washington Braviers, who has Tornadus T, Mega Medicham, Kyurem, Zarude, Primarina, Audino, Stunfisk, Nihilego, Steelix, Incineroar, and Puku Muku.
Right off the bat, I think my main criticism of this team is the fact that Torn is kind of forced to do a fair bit for this team. It's the only defogger, first of all. It's the only removal, in fact. It's the best ground check on this team. Zarude can switch into them fairly decently as well. But having a 4 times weakness and weakness to fighting as well, which sort of covers a fair amount of ground as well, is kind of annoying. It's the main fastest Pokemon in this team as well. I do think the Scarf options are mainly in the Zarude and Nihilego are pretty decent. But just the ground weakness, I feel, is the main thing. You have Stunfisk, Nihilego, Steelix, Incineroar, all on the back end, all weak to ground, and you only have the Torn and the Zarude as the main defensive ground checks, particularly, again, the Torn, because it's immune. I feel like a lot of the times he's probably going to be forced to bring defensive Defog, Taunt, U-Turn, Hurricane with this team. I think the Rock options they could be a bit better. Nihilego, ideally, you don't want to be setting up hazards with. You probably want to run a more offensive set on that. Steelix and Stunfisk are both decent mons, but they aren't too consistent. They're not a Pokemon you're going to be bringing every week. I think offensively, the team synergizes fairly well. You have the Zarude there to check the Psychics for Mega Medi. You have Mega Medi to obviously break through the steals that Kyurem might struggle with. I think because of the offensive coverage that a Torn, Kyurem, Zarude has, essentially, they can really cover a lot of their checks. I think the Primarina is really nice as well as the Fairy, being a bit more bulkier and a bit slower. Another issue, though, with the team is the speed tiers. You have Kyurem at 95, and then it drops all the way down to 60 with the Prim. So you're really not covering anywhere from like your 80s to like 70s, because most of the time Primarina probably isn't going to be running a speed boosting nature unless it's scarfed, in which case you probably don't outspeed it then. So you're affording those 80s to 70s, basically non-speed boosting natures, so they can run Adwin or Modest, for example, which I think can be a bit annoying, especially since this team isn't the bulkiest. Audino can wish pass into things. Torn does have regen, but once you once you start really chipping away at those Pokemon, it can be really hard to switch into.
Yep. And I think something to add is that, like, yes, this team has very strong momentum options, but there's also like a very poor removal, right? You can pivot around all you want, but if every mon's taking rocks, if every mon's taking T spikes, uh, you're kind of screwed. Because the only source of removal on this team is Torn T. And while it's like an amazing defogger, you're not always gonna be able to get it off, and you're not always gonna want to run defog on Torn. So you're in like a dilemma. Like, do I want to fit, taunt or knockoff or U-turn or even like heat wave for those, steel types. So it becomes really awkward for this team to deal with. However, this team's got very good, wish passer. You can facilitate momentum really well, so it can be alleviated. And the ways this team can just push forward with advantage, right? Mega Meta Champ Kiram, they can come in and just kill things. Per Marina Zarud, like this team, if you can get it in against specific threats, it can just go off and snowball like no other team.
Yeah, I think my one more. I think the offensive structure of this team is really nice because you can sort of just pick and choose what you want to break and what you want to operate as wing cons. You have versatility in Kyurem, Zarude, Primarina, Nihilego, all as both offensive breakers and wing cons through like scarf sets, setup sets, which I think is really nice, or just even like spec sets or bandit sets. I think another issue with this team actually is the fact that the knockoff absorber is sort of Primarina and Steelix. I mean, Steelix most of the time is probably going to be running a Lure Berry, like Chople or Shuka, in order to tank a hit or two. And then your next best options are like Prim or Audino, which ideally you don't want to get knocked off. Like Torn, Kyurem, Zarude, if they lose their items, even the Nihilego, if all of them lose their items, the match can become a lot tougher.
Yeah, let's go on to top three now. Number three is Veno and the DC Draclix. And his team consists of Mega Gallade, Zapdos, Greninja, Seismitoad, Sylveon, Metagross, Serena, Lola Muck, Haxorus, and Centiskorn.
Overall, I really like this team. I think Mega Gallade Greninja. Greninja's probably one of the better, if not one of the best, dark types to pair with Mega Gallade. I think Zapdos here works really well here because it's sort of able to check a lot of the flying types that Gallade does. I think generally this team has a lot of the roles covered for it. One of my main concerns is removal. I think mainly having Zapdos as a defogger and Serena as a spinner is kind of bad. Zapdos doesn't really want to run defog most of the time. Ideally, it runs like 3 attacks Roost or like 2 attacks Toxic Roost or something like that, or even Agility. And Serena isn't the most consistent remover. Granted, this team does have a really consistent spiker in Gren, so it might be able to force a lot of defogs most of the time. I think the Rockers are solid as well. You have Seismitoad and Metagross, they're both pretty decent. They aren't the most consistent mons, but most of the time you're going to be bringing at least one of these two Pokemon to a match, and they'll probably have to be designated to be the Rocker. As well as this, I think the momentum options are somewhat solid. I think Gren Zapdos is alright. I'm not sure if Zapdos really likes having Volt Switch as its main stab move. I think it much preferred Thunderbolt Discharge. And U-Turn Gren is also solid, but ideally is 3 attack spikes. I think the Special Breaker could be a little bit better. Gren, depending on the special wall, can't really break it too well. Gallade obviously can really sort of just run through anything not named or like a bulky psychic or a bulky fairy. So you have that covered. And potentially you have like options like Metal Sound, Zapdos, or even like Specs Sylveon. I think there's a lot of versatility here. I would have just liked maybe a bit more on the removal end, and maybe also a bit more on the speed tier end, particularly the drop off from like 97 all the way down to 70. Haxorus probably isn't going to be coming quite a lot, so it's actually really 100 to 70. And Size and Serena probably aren't going to be coming offensive most of the time, so you have like those base 90s all the way down to 80s that probably can afford to run um, attack boosting natures as opposed to speed boosting natures.
Yeah, like you said, not the speed isn't always ideal, but I do think this team can fix those issues because you have good speed control. You have Zapdos spreading paras. You can potentially have you know the speed creeping can be adjusted accordingly. It's just specific mons can give the team issues. Something else to know is that this team lacks like viable scarf. Right, you have potentially Greninja, but that's already fast. So like anything below Greninja, don't really have to worry about that. Your Mega Galate's not going to hold a scarf. Zapdos, it's kind of iffy. Um, and then you get to like Haxorus, which usually wants to be set up. And then you drop all the way down to your Sylveons, your Metagross, which, yeah, they can run scarfs, but they're not always going to be that fast. So they get outpaced by other scarfers, or they just get outpaced because they're just slow to begin with, and you can't outspeed some of the faster mons, anyways. Right? But this seems like it still has very powerful offense that can just take advantage of the opponent with pivoting moves going into Mega Gallade. You got Haxorus. We've seen how strong Haxorus is, and they can really break holes with teams that cannot handle it. But that's also come with a disadvantage in that this team's kind of weak to offensive fairy types. Metagross can take a few hits, but if you're facing against Tapu Koko who can drop thunderbolts, or if you're facing like a Mega Diancie who can just earth power you, then you're really not in a good shape when you try to switch in here and there.
Yeah, I think certain offensive electric types can also be a bit of an issue. I don't think all of them are, but I think certain ones, as you said, like Coco, for example, even like a Thunderous. The main issue with Zapdos being it isn't able to offensively pressure them. It's forced to run Toxic. You have Gren there that's weak to electric types as well, and then Seismitoad, which can, depending on the electric type, can be hit by Grass Knot or another decent enough coverage move. Serena isn't that consistent of an electric check at times. Haxorus isn't really that bulky as well, so they can be a bit of an issue.
Okay, now we have final two. So at second place we have Glop. With Glop is Plop, whose team is Garchomp, Rotom Wash, Cinderace, Aegislash, Mandibuzz, Mega Heracross, Comfey, Garbodor, Celebi, Tauros, and Probopass.
I really like this team. It's sort of cookie cutter. You have Garchomp, Rotom Wash, Cinderace, mainly the Rotom Wash, Cinderace, Mandibuzz, Comfey, even the Celebi. All is pretty good Volturn uses to bring in like Swords Dance. Garchomp, potentially like a Mega Heracross, the main breaker on this team, as well as the Aegislash as well. I think the speed options are pretty nice. 119 from Cinderace. Most of the speed options are covered pretty well. Could have one or two better Scarfers. Ideally, you don't want to run Scarf Garchomp. Scarf Tauros is kind of bad. Then you have middling options like Celebi and Rotom Wash, which can put in work depending on the matchup. I think my main issue with this team is that there's a fair amount of wing cons here. You have like Autotomize, Aegislash, Swords Dance, Skill Shot Garchomp, potential Calm Mind Comfey. I think my main issue with this team is that this Aegislash is going to be pressured quite a lot. to act as a potential special wall breaker, and depending on the fairy type that this team faces, well, it could also be a bit of an issue. I look at Mega Diance's matchup, for example, and like a calm mindset can really just go to town on this team. It's for Cinderace is the only thing that can really outspeed it and hits it with Iron Head. But if Diancie gets a calm mind up, for example, then it can really go to town. And other fairies as well, if they also calm mind up, then that can be a bit of an issue. Having Garchomp, Mandibuzz, Mega Heracross, three of your main Pokemon as well, all being weak to Fairy, is kind of bad. Cinderace isn't that consistent of a Fairy check. Garbodor isn't as well, so I think the Aegislash is going to be pressured to do a lot here. But if he's able to alleviate a lot of the roles that it's forced to run, then I think this team will do very well.
Yeah, I think looking at this team, there are a lot of positives, a lot of strong mons that can really help benefit each other. He drafted Aegislash, and he drafted one of the best Aegislash checks, Mandibuzz. Rotom Wash can Volt Switch, into a lot of different mons here. Mega Heracross, who really benefits from momentum, and this entire team offers momentum. You got your U-turns, you got your Volt Switches, you even have, I guess, Baton Pass with Celebi or Cinderace if you just don't want to take, U-turn chip with Rocky Helmet. Getting in Mega Heracross just opens the door for a lot of these other mons to shine, right? Mega Heracross, you fire off your Bullisy, your Pin Missile, you can, damage their fairy types. Then Garchomp can pop off. If you damage their flying type, then potentially, Garchomp can still come in and just EQ, right? A lot of these mons, they can benefit so much from just a little bit of chip for the defensive mons. And then something else to know is that there's good and solid hazard control, right? Rotom Wash, Mandibuzz, Confe. These are like excellent defoggers that can really keep the hazards off for this team, which is like a big thing for this team to deal with. Toxic Spikes and Stealth Rock, they're very annoying for this team to deal with, especially when you have like your knockoff users just spamming knockoff, because this team's kind of knock weak. Other than Mega Heracross, nothing else really wants to take a knock or like lose their items. So these are good options to just kind of patch your weaknesses that allows this team to shine even more.
Yeah, I think one other issue I had with this team is that, well, I do think Garchomp is a really consistent rocker. I don't think the secondary rocker in Celebi is that amazing. I look at this team structure and I feel that most of the time this team is going to probably run the first four Mandibuzz. And maybe it chooses between running like a Heracross, Comfey, or a Celebi. So most of the time, if you're not bringing Celebi, you're forced to run Rocks on Garchomp, which it can afford to run. Again, like SD Rocks, 2 attacks is its best set, arguably. But ideally, you're able to run Rocks on something else so that you can alleviate it and instead run like another coverage move or a substitute or have it perform a different role.
And with that, we come to our number one team. We have Harris and the Atlanta Braviaries, who has Mega Mawile, Slowbro, Nidoking, Thundurus, Snorlax, Bronzong, Como-O, Lone Persian, Volcarona, and Leafeon.
So I really like the way that Mega Maw has been supported here. He has the Trick Room option in Slowbro and Bronzong, which I think is really nice. Having another Steel type with Mega Maw is also really important so that it isn't pressured defensively to check certain things. Both of his Steels are share types that are actually that resist fighting types, and he's able to supplement that by drafting one of the best fighting checks in the game in Slowbro, and Nidoking that can also sponge 1 of 2 hits. Same with Thundurus. His rock options are really solid as well. You have Komo-O, you have Bronzong, you have Nidoking, all of which are able to run rocks or are able to rotate their roles so they can run more offensive sets. One of my main issues with this team is, or probably the only one, is that the Scarfers aren't great. You have like Scarfer Lowland Persian, which is kind of niche. You have Scarf Nidoking, which ideally you want to run like sub 3 attacks or 3 attacks rocks, but can also work in a pinch. But apart from that, I think this team is just really solid. It covers basically all of its bases really well. You have the physical breaker and Mega Maw. You have the special breaker Nidoking, both of which complement each other really well. Mega Maw can sort of deal with the bulky psychics that Nidoking can't really power through. And like certain steel types that Mega Maw might have trouble with, Nidoking easily takes on. Thundurus is a really nice win condition there. Because it struggles with opposing electrics, sometimes grasses as well, which and dragons even, all of which Nidoking and Mega Maw can help to check or break past. I think the versatility, like towards the back end as well, you have multiple setup options. You have Sword Stance Mawile, you have Nasty Spell Thundurus, you have setup combo, be it like Belly Drum, Dragon Dance, Autotomize, Clangorous. You have Quiver Dance, Volcarona. These are all amazing offensive options, and you have more defensive options such as like Dual Dance Slowbro or even just Calm Mind, Curse Lax as well. It's just a really, really solid team that doesn't have too many holes in it.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this team just synergizes with each other really well. Mons pivoting to each other, trick room mode, setting up for one another, breaking for one another. It's just really well thought out and just really well built. And I do think like even if this team doesn't hit that high of a speed, you don't really need that with Trick Room, with Volcarona Como being able to just speed yourself up, Thunderous spreading paralysis, right? Like it's not an issue. Something else that I can notice is that the removal is kind of awful, right? Thundy Eye and Volcarona are not your ideal defoggers, so getting rid of rocks can be an issue, especially when you have Volcarona that he's probably gonna run boots, but on the off chance that you're not, or on the off chance that it gets knocked off or you lose it, you might be a bit of. But otherwise, this team just stands out as like definitive number one. It's got great wall breaking, got great defenses. Yeah, good pivoting too.
Yeah, he has a lot of support options as well. As in mainly taunters. He has the prankster Thundurus. He has like taunt Komao, Nidoking, Alolan Persian as well, which is kind of nice for Hazard. I think that's like mainly the other thing, the other main criticism. However, I feel like a fair amount of this team does run boots, and I like the fact that he has two really good knockoff absorbers in the Persian and the Komao. Removal again is a bit suspect, but I feel like with a lot of this team, he has really good momentum gainers in Slowbro, Thundurus. He has Mega Maul, which basically forces a switch out most of the time. So as long as he plays this team offensively enough, he shouldn't be too worried about getting Hazard stacked, though it can become an issue with certain matchups. One more thing I like to say about the team real quick is that its reliable recovery is a little bit suspect. You have Slack Off, Slowbro, you have Volcarona with Roost, and I think that's about it. You're forced to run Rest on basically everything else. The Leafeon is there in the back to Wish Pass, but that's really about it. It's not going to be coming most matchups anyways. So that might be a bit of an issue if he wants to play this, if he wants to play the game a bit slower. But offensively speaking, this team just really synergizes so well.
And with that, we've covered all 16 teams of Speed Boost. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you liked our critiques, our criticisms, our everything. And again, a reminder, this is just our opinion, and they can vary between people to people. So, feel free to tell us if we're wrong, but don't just, bash us or just yell at us for no apparent reason.
Please don't
this is all for fun.
Yeah, please don't witch hunt us.
And with that, good night, DGBA.
See you guys.